So Elizabeth, my first question would probably be, what made you get into writing?
That's a question I love as well. So I think it's got to be basically a love of reading. So I don't ever remember a time when I didn't read. And I also don't remember a time when I didn't write. Now, I don't remember really, really early memories, but I remember being either 5 or 6. And I could definitely read and I could definitely write at that time. And I used to make up a lot of stories. Um, but I didn't actually know that I wanted to be a writer. I grew up in the northeast of England, and I grew up in a very specific time, Margaret Thatcher, and it was a very poor and quite horrible time in the north of England when I grew up. So we were very poor, and a lot of people were out of work, and there weren't very many jobs, and there was a lot of aggression. And I actually just thought having a job would be great, like, but I'd never met a writer, I'd never seen a writer. I thought writers lived in castles, and it didn't seem, even though I was writing all of the time, it didn't seem that that was something that was open to me. So this is one of the reasons I like to do chats like this, with your lovely self, Maeve, having interviews and talking with young people and with children too, because no one ever said to me that I could be a writer. So I didn't actually think of it myself until I was about 30. And that was
Oh,
because internet happened.
oh wow. And what type of stories did you come up with when you were 5 or 6? If you said it didn't.
I used to chop a lot of heads off.
Oh,
I was always more Brothers Grimm than Hans Christian Andersen, So I always liked dark stories, myth and legend, and I'd read myth and legend from all over the world. And we know how strange those things are with shapeshifters and murder and a lot of dark forces happening. And I would really copy
definitely.
those. Yeah, and I never used to necessarily, I didn't realize, but when I was very young, I used to, this is going to sound strange now, Maeve, so forgive me. But when I was laid in bed, I used to make up a story, and then the next day I would recap, and then I'd carry the story on. And then the next day I'd give myself a little recap and carry the story on. And really what I was doing was writing my first novels without realizing. But the content of those, the only books we had in the house belonged to my sister, who was 8 years older than me. And they were all about horses. Jill's Gymkhana, Jill gets a pony, Jill's rides out. I don't know, all these different Jill books. And so at that time, I used to make up stories about horses. I didn't have a horse. I didn't know anyone with a horse, but I guess I was kind of like emulating those stories. But I love just making up stories in bed. Um,
Oh, I love that. Was there anyone who gave you support when you were younger? So say about my age, so about 16,
and was there anybody what? Sorry.
that gave you support in your love of writing.
Yeah, it actually came a bit earlier. When I was in primary school. So when I was very young, I spent some time in foster care, and then when I came home from foster care, went into the local primary school, and the teacher there was very strict and very harsh, but I loved him, and I think it's probably because I hadn't had many boundaries, so I knew where I stood with him. And he really encouraged me to write all of the time, and he used to give me spare copybooks and just let me write and write and write and write. And he would bring me like Edgar Allan Poe. Like I'm like 7, and he brings me Edgar Allan Poe and things like that. I know, right? Um,
Oh
and
my
he would
God.
bring all kind of weird, crazy stuff, which now everyone would just say was totally inappropriate. But at that time, I just gobbled it up. So I guess that was where it started. And then when I was in secondary school, there was like a poetry competition, and this is going to sound awful because I remember my primary school teacher, he was called Mr. Hill. I don't
Oh,
remember my English school teacher in secondary school, but they suggested that I put a poem forward for this competition. And I did it in secret because I was really embarrassed and I didn't think anything would happen. I didn't like failing at anything. Um, and yeah, and it actually got published. So, and that was when I was, I think, 16. So I had some support, but it just still seemed like it was something so alien and so not possible. And actually, moving to Ireland was one of the big reasons why I became a writer, because Ireland was the first place where I met other people wanting to be writers and where I met real writers. And so I started going to workshops here, and then I met other people who really wanted to write as well and were serious about it, you know. And so moving to Ireland, I was living in Spain before that and getting things published online because the internet happened. But then when I moved to Ireland, that's when I felt like I got the most support, and also when the idea came to me that actually I could do this as my job.
Oh my God. Well, that's absolutely amazing. Like, that's so inspirational. What is the best story that came up that you ever came up with,
Oh,
in your opinion?
hard. Yeah, I know. I'm like, that's like asking like, which is my favorite puppy. I don't have children, so it's like my favorite puppy.
Oh yeah.
um, I'm actually really proud of the trilogy, which means it's like 3 books. Um,
Oh, yeah.
but the story of the trilogy was the first one. I don't have the actual the real cover's blue, but they made some like special silver editions. So I've got like a silver one here with like, can see it's got fancy edges. And
Yeah.
this idea came to me when I lived in Dublin. When I first moved to Ireland, I moved to Dublin. I live in West Cork now. Um, and it was moving to Ireland, and I've been writing and getting some success with, you know, stories and poems and things published. But this big idea came to me from all the cobblestones in Dublin. And I came up with this world that was between Dublin and West Cork. And there's real elements. So Dublin is recognizable and West Cork is recognizable. But then I made up all these fantastical elements as well. And I was really proud of it because it wasn't something I'd actually kind of written before. Um, and also, it was probably the story that excited me the most. Like, and that was the one that I thought, oh, maybe I could get this published. It took a long time, but I did get there. So the first one was the Book of Learning. And then I realized it had to be a trilogy because the story was so huge. I was like, I can't contain it with one book. Does that make sense to you? Like, it was,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there was just too much going on with the characters. And I was like, if I put it in one book, it'll be like 6,000 pages long. And that's when I knew it had to be a trilogy. So the second one was the Book of Shadows, which I don't have with me here. And then the third one's the Book of Revenge.
Oh,
So
nice.
yeah, I was kind of, I think that's the first story that I ever wrote that really excited me enough where I thought maybe I could get this published, you know, combined with moving to Ireland and meeting writers here.
Oh yeah. What's your favorite? Who's your favorite character that you ever created?
Do you know, it's really hard to answer that because at the minute I'm working on new projects that I don't know where they're happening, and they're always my favorite characters at that time because they're really in my head. Um,
Okay.
but they're not really, you know, they're not really there yet. So I've got a character which doesn't exist yet for anybody else, but she's called Arabella Pepper, and she's a wild detective, and she has a pet crow called Blue, and she solves crimes, but in a city setting using nature. So at the minute, I'm really in her head because I'm doing a rewrite of that. So at the minute, she's my favorite. But I think, again, it's going back to these books because the main character, Ebony Smart, is this kind of really feisty, strong, independent young girl. And I liked spending time with her, but I've got a character which I feel like doesn't get enough love. So can I give her a little bit of love? Even though you said one character, now I'm choosing a million. Is that allowed?
That's allowed. Definitely. It's so
I love
hard to pick one.
it is, and I like breaking rules. What can I say? So in my young adult novel, Caramel Hearts, I really like the main character in this, Liv. She makes a lot of mistakes. There's a lot of flaws. I'd just like to say that the cover here doesn't really reflect the book because it looks like it's romance, but it's actually about someone growing up in a family with addiction. Um, and it's got real cake recipes all the way through it, which I made up. And one of the recipes is caramel hearts, and that's the idea is, you know, if you break a heart, it's kind of soft inside. It can be hard on the outside and soft inside, but it does look a bit like a romance, doesn't it? But it's not a romance, I promise.
It looks a small bit like a romance, but I definitely buy that now. I'd love that. I love a good dark story.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm still now like more Brothers Grimm than you know, Hans Christian Andersen. Can't get
Oh
dark
yeah,
enough for me.
I know. So on the topic of characters, and I got this inspiration from Rory, who was meant to be doing it yesterday. if there's one character you would love to sit down and have a chat with, it can be one of yours or it can be something from back in the 1800s or modern times. Who would you sit down
Mm,
with?
that is an excellent. Do you know who I'd love to sit down with? And this is probably a strange answer. The witches, Roald Dahl's witches. I think they'd be
Okay.
great crack altogether. Yeah, like I just think they'd be great fun, like masquerading as these like lovely old ladies, and then just ripping off their wigs and having this mad party. I reckon they'd be great crack. I'd like to hang out with them.
I can I can see because I never really read Roald Dahl as a kid. I was more David Volumes type, but I'd say they'd be brilliant. I love that.
That's me showing my age, you see, reading
Oh
Roald
no,
Dahl instead.
no,
I
I
think
have a whole box. Sorry. Here you go.
no, I think myself and David Williams are probably the same age, you see, so he didn't exist when I was younger.
Okay. Yeah, because I read one or two Roald Dahl books, but he wouldn't be my favorite. Like,
No, I only read a couple. I think I'd outgrown him by the time I was a really good reader. So by the time I was 10, I was already reading like Charles Dickens, and there wasn't the wealth of children's books or the accessibility to as many like children and young adult books. So what tended to happen was if you were a good reader, you'd suddenly jump around the age of 10, 11, or 12 to either romance or horror, um
yeah.
and, and the classics. And so I jumped, of course, to horror, as you can imagine. So I was reading like Stephen King and James Herbert and all the classics by the age of 10. So
Yeah,
yeah, so I can.
I can relate to that.
Were you the same? Did you like?
Yeah, yeah. I read Little Women when I was 11.
It's a great book, isn't it?
Love it.
Did you read A Little Princess?
No,
Do you know the story?
no.
Okay, this one is really cool because the title again is like one that I wouldn't have gone for. But Little Princess is a classic book. Same writer as The Secret Garden, I think, if
Oh,
I remember rightly.
oh,
Um, and so it's a really rich girl whose father's in the army, goes into this boarding school, and she has the best room. She's very nice. She's a really nice girl. But then it turns out that like the father goes missing, and there's no more money coming in, so they turn her into. It's like a Cinderella in a way. So they turn her into a maid, and they make her like scrub everybody's cinders from their fires, and she in the roof. She goes up into the attic in this awful room, but there's a guy across the way, like an Indian guy, and he has a monkey, and the monkey comes over and like plays with her and things. The guy makes these like amazing feasts and things happen in secret. It's a really good book. I'd
oh,
suggest you read it now.
oh, I'm gonna look that one up. What's it called? Little Princess.
A Little Princess, yeah, it's really good, really good.
I'm I'm gonna look that up now. I think that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, it's fun.
Right. Okay. Are there any authors that you take inspiration from? So maybe like Charles Dickens or someone like that.
Yeah, I mean, I did love Dickens. I absolutely adore Dickens when I was younger. I loved Emily Bronte as well. I was never in the Jane Austen camp. Sorry, Jane Austen lovers, it just wasn't me. I guess I liked the more wild and moody kind of moors and things. But now every book I read, really, I see as inspiration. And I read very widely. So I read a lot of poetry, short stories, essays. I read a lot of like experimental fiction. I like experimental things, literary fiction. But I also read a lot of current writers, for children and young people. Um,
Yeah.
and some of my favorites, I've got to say, for historical fiction, there's an Irish writer, Nicola Pearce, and her stuff is excellent. I'm trying to think. She had one called Chasing Ghosts, which was a mix of a ship being lost in Antarctica or the Antarctic. I always get that mixed up. Anyway, a ship being lost in an icy place, and a girl who has a dream about the ghost of the guy who's trapped on the ship, and she helps the ship be found. So that's really cool. Her historical fiction. So that's Nicola Pearce. And then for young adults, I think Deirdre Sullivan is just one of the most beautiful writers ever. Have you read any of Deirdre's stuff?
No. I
She did.
wouldn't.
No. I'm going to reach up very strangely here, if that's okay.
Okay.
But some of the ones here that I absolutely love that I've got of hers. Oh, there's Chasing Ghosts as well. So that was Chasing Ghosts, the one that I said, the historical fiction writer, Nicola Pearce. But Deirdre Sullivan, Tangleweed and Brine is like some feminist retellings of fairy tales. And then this one, A Savage Her Reply, is a retelling of The Children of Lear, and it's got this amazing like starts, which are like of each chapter, which is like writing, but it's actually like a little poem.
Wow.
Yeah, really. So experimental, dark, beautiful writing. So reading other people's books, you know, people who are writing now, you know, it really inspires me to keep going. And so I try and keep up with the new stuff coming out as well as the classics, because I want to be inspired by it all. I'm just greedy, Méabh. I'm just greedy.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look up all these books. I'm gonna be broke by the end of this interview.
That's me every time there's a festival. It's just, you know, I've hide books now. Like I've got them under the fruit bowl, and the fruit bowl, my husband comes in and he's like, is that fruit bowl getting higher? And I'm like, oh no. Because I wedged a few more secret books under. I know. It's a good illness to have. It's a good sickness.
Oh yeah. This is a controversial one, and people are very divided on this.
Okay.
Do you prefer a hard copy book or a Kindle?
Hard copy. I actually can't read on Kindle at all. I want to. I try. But what happens is, so when I'm writing poems or ideas, short stories, essays, I often start in notebooks. But with novels, I always type straight onto the computer. And what happens, so when I pick up, when I try and read on a Kindle, it could be like one of my favorite writers in the world, like Neil Gaiman or, you know, Deirdre Sullivan, or, you know, it could be anybody, but I start editing, it feels like work. So when I try and read on a Kindle, it feels like I have to, because I do reader reports for people and I help people with editing their books and stuff. And so when I try and read on a Kindle, it feels like I'm doing that. So yeah, so I want to, if you've got any tips on how to get over that and read on a Kindle, then please tell me, because then I could stop traveling places with 20 books in my case and have some room for clothes.
Yeah, I'm actually not sure how you read on a Kindle. Like, I got one last Christmas and I just find it great, but I still read hard copy.
Do you? The thing is as well, there's something like just, you know, like with a book, like when you hold it, like the smell, the weight of it, like, and I don't know, there's an art to holding the book, you know, like I like holding it, like I hold it like that sometimes, and then I like, you know, and then sometimes I don't, and I just hold it like that, and I hold it in different ways, and sometimes I'm holding it like that, and I don't know why, but it changes, like I think with the excitement as I'm reading it. And sometimes it's like, you know, like the two-handed approach is when it's very exciting, but there's something about the tactile feeling of it, you know. I love it. I love how
love that. We've kind of already answered this question, but what is your favorite genre of book aside from horror?
Aside from horror, I like too many. I like bits of everything. It's probably easier to say what I don't read so much of, but then so like recently I love recently I bought a collection of westerns, you know, like like cowboy and sort of like wild west sort of setting, but not necessarily a typical kind of what you'd think of, like cowboys and cavalries charging through the desert. It's kind of like, you know, so I bought a big anthology of those recently. I love nature writing. I love everything. And I can't say what attracts me to it. Usually it's dark, you know, but I do like things that are beautiful just for being beautiful's sake as well. And I like brevity. I've recently discovered, also every time I like something, I discover I want to like something else and I go searching for it. So there was a book in the Dream House, which is a very experimental non-fiction book that I really liked. But I've recently discovered surrealist poetry, and specifically surrealist prose poetry, and I'm really enjoying that. I got to write. I wrote a poem recently about me going for a cup of tea with Margaret Thatcher.
Ooh,
So I'm enjoying reading it and exploring it as well. So it
that'd be an
changes all the
interesting one.
time. Yeah, it doesn't go well. Just so you know, me and Maggie, we don't really make friends. We try, but it's never going to happen. You know. Yeah, she
I think
ditches
it'd be really
me in the end. She ditches me on a bin truck.
good. I think it could be interesting though. Like it'd be interesting to see her views on things.
Yeah, I should. Yeah, well, it's a pity she wasn't alive. I could have sent it to her. Maybe I could send it to the trust.
Oh,
There must be a
oh,
Margaret Thatcher
maybe.
trust. Send it across.
Could be one somewhere, I'd say.
Oh, well, I think this highlights the point though for me that like writing, and reading, they should both be fun, So like I meet a lot of people who say they don't like reading, and when I ask them, what they're saying is they haven't found the book that they like, like they'll always remember something they enjoy. Or a lot of people will say, oh, I only like reading if it's a good book, and what they're actually saying is they're not really sure what they want to read. And I just like to read as widely as possible, and I approach my writing in that way, so my trilogy is urban fantasy, but then my Caramel Hearts is contemporary, and I've written dystopian, nature writing, all kinds, So I like it all to be fun, and I feel like when I've got to a certain place with one thing, I want to mix it up and do something different and keep the joy, and but it's good to
Good.
laugh. It's good to laugh when you're writing as well.
I like that. In your opinion, which books are better, classic ones or modern?
I couldn't get rid of either. I couldn't get rid of either. Like if I had to, I think I don't think either are better. I think modern books would be typically more relatable and more accessible for more people. So in that way, they're probably reaching more people, because they're relevant to current lives. But I think if
Yeah.
you're a big reader, an avid reader like yourself or like me, I think we can see the kind of relevance and things of interest and things to learn from and things to escape into in classic books as well. Would you agree with me on that? Do you?
Well, yeah, I do love a good classic.
I do love a good classic. Sometimes I think I've read Wuthering Heights like maybe 20 times now, and it's definitely going to happen again. I can feel it because we're coming, it's winter, we've had storms, it's raging, it's wet and windy, and I could do me with a little bit of Nellie's advice, and Heathcliff's
Mm.
passion. so,
Yeah,
so I like
yeah,
both. I think they have different jobs to do though, like I wouldn't try and write like a classic now, but I really like retellings. What about you? I mean, I showed those ones of Deirdre Sullivan, they're retellings, but I love a good retelling as well, like where you take a classic tale or a myth and legend or whatever and then put it in a modern setting. What do you have any thoughts on those?
yeah. I like the modern book, and I like the idea that Children of Lair. That would probably be one I'd buy because my brother's name comes from the Children of Lair.
Ah, I see. Yeah.
So it'd probably be a nice one to have for the sentimental value. But I kind of agree with you on that. I think a, a modern telling of an old classic is a good way to go.
Yeah, I'm always interested in like how people do it. I'm actually trying to write a modern retelling of the Minotaur. I love the Minotaur. There's Minotaur and Herne the Hunter were my two favorite obsessions, apart from wanting a werewolf boyfriend, which I've never managed yet, but it's a goal. But they were my kind of my obsessions more when I was younger. And there isn't really any retellings of the Minotaur, and I just think he's a really fascinating character. So I'm trying to do that. But there's some really good retellings. Tracy Chevalier did one that was a retelling of Othello, and she set it, Shakespeare's Othello, and she set it in a playground, and all the characters were children, and it all happened over one day. So she really messed with that idea, but it was excellent. And when I was reading it, so it was just so cool because I think it was called New Boy. Yeah, New Boy. And just to take that setting, it totally messed with it, but I could still see the story of Othello in there. You know, it was
Yeah.
yeah, and there was that Becoming Diner as well, which was the retelling Kitterwell. I always pronounce, I don't know how to pronounce that. And she did a retelling of Moby Dick, but because there's no women in Moby Dick, so she did Becoming Dinah, which was a retelling of Moby Dick, but it was like um, with with female characters. It was excellent.
Okay. I love that. I especially love the
You-
Shakespeare one because I love Shakespeare and
Do
hope to read more of
you?
them in the
Me
future.
too. I think if you connect with Shakespeare, so you really love language and words, right? Like,
I, I love language, and even then, my strongest subjects in school would be like languages, so Irish and Spanish and English, probably throw history in there as well, and music. Like,
yeah.
just love languages and stuff.
Yeah, and I think like if you connect with Shakespeare, it just feels so incredible. And like often people say to me, like, how do I translate Shakespeare though? But I think it's as similar to when you're learning a language. When I lived in Spain, I was I I wasn't fluent, but I was intermediate during my time there, and for sure, you know, maybe a bit above.
Yeah.
But I could think in Spanish. I didn't have to translate it. But now, if I hear someone speaking Spanish, I have to think again in English and try and translate it and try and get it right. And I think Shakespeare's a bit like that. You know, like if you get it, you just think in that way, and it just connects, and it just feels wonderful. I love Shakespeare too.
Yeah, because the copies I get usually have annotations. So I have Romeo and Juliet, I had to study it for school, and A Midsummer Night's Dream, and they both have connotations. But then I have a copy of Hamlet, which I'm hoping to read, and a book of sonnets, and there's no
Oh,
explanation of
and
what
it's
it means
oh
whatsoever.
wow. Hamlet, I
That's
think,
going to
is
be
one of my
interesting.
favorites. I liked Hamlet
Is
a
it
lot.
good?
Yeah, but Macbeth, the witches in Macbeth,
Oh my God.
bubble, bubble, toil and trouble. Yeah, I love the witches.
Mm.
See, I'm obsessed with witches. I didn't even know. Here's me rewriting the Minotaur, and I just keep talking about witches.
That's really amazing. Right. If you weren't a writer, what would you like to be?
Now, I love travel. My favorite things in the world is books and reading and writing, you know, so like anything to do with books and travel. And I try and travel as much as I can. So regularly I take myself off on residencies for like a month at a time. I abandon my husband, I abandon my dog, I leave them at home,
Hmm.
and I go off to work on my book for a month uninterrupted. I typically on those residencies work on my book around 12 hours a day. So I don't want to be cooking for other people. And yeah, I know it's a lot. And I go right into the world, and it's a little bit crazy in there, you know. So this year I was in Belgrade in Serbia for a month working on a book, and I was in Portugal working on a book. So if I wasn't a writer, I would love to be like an explorer. I love anything David Attenborough, and you know, when you see people like out surviving, eating bugs and making their own fires, like all of that. Now that's in theory. However, I hate being cold, so I won't be very good in the Arctic. And every single bug on the planet bites me, so I wouldn't be very good in jungles. I know I've been to jungles and come out looking like covered in bites everywhere and swollen arms and everything. So in theory, I'd love to be an explorer, but I don't think I'd have the. We won't tell anyone, but I don't think I'd have the skills for it. But it's nice to think
Um,
about it. You know, I can dream.
It'd be really cool.
It'd be so hard now, though. I think to even find anywhere that's not explored. You know, like in some ways, I feel like the internet. I love the internet. You know, so we can do things like this. You know,
Yeah.
I can send things to my like agent or to my publishers. It's like, but travel, is there such a thing as anywhere secret anymore? Like, you know,
No,
you've got all
no,
these
no.
Instagram reels of like secret spots in Dublin, and you would turn up and there'd be like 600 people there because everyone's seen the secret spots on Instagram.
Oh
So
yeah.
I think it'd be hard to be. So maybe that makes it even more magical being an explorer. Just the idea that you could, you know, go somewhere where there's people like maybe Papua New Guinea or somewhere like that, where there's people that aren't aware of electricity and this crazy world we've created.
Oh
That'd be,
yeah.
I'm a typical writer. I'm nearly there in my head now. I'm like, oh, that's my new reality. Maybe I need to write a book about an explorer.
Oh, definitely.
Oh, Maeve, you might have just given me another amazing idea.
You
Thank you.
see, this happened last night as well. We had another author on, Sarah Moore Fitzgerald, and we were talking about
Oh, I
vegetarians to
love
give us an idea.
Sarah. Sarah's books are incredible. Oh my God, you've got to read Sarah's
No,
book. Her books are excellent. I love Sarah so much. She's wonderful, wonderful
yeah, I
writer,
read her.
wonderful human.
Yeah, I read her book, All the Money in the World. And oh my God, it's amazing.
Yeah, she's excellent. She's really, really, really good. And also, it's a nice thing, like the children's book world, we pretty much all know each other. There's very few that we like writers that we don't know, you know, within living in
Yeah,
Ireland or and it's such a nice community, you know, it's such a lovely community, and we all really support each other. And people are like, does it get a bit like handbags at dawn? And you know, is it a bit backstabbing? Not at all, you know. um a good friend of mine, Caroline Bush, has just had a new book out, and it's fantastic, and I got to go to her help launch her book, you know. And Sarah Moore Fitzgerald, we recently met up at a festival and had a nice chat and coffee together, and you know, catching up, seeing what we're working on, seeing what we're doing. It's such a great community, so I feel very happy to be part of it. And it's special to Ireland as well. It's very special to Ireland. It's very welcoming.
oh yeah. And I have another interview in a couple of minutes, so this is probably the last question.
That's
Have you any advice for children who love reading?
You love reading? Yeah,
Yeah.
I would say read as widely and wildly and as excitedly as you can. You know, reading should be fun. It should be an escape. There's no rules. There's no, this is a good book and that's a bad book. You read whatever you want to read, whatever excites you.
Okay.
You go for it, you know, and don't ever apologize for what you're reading, because it's all valid. There's room for all the books and all the stories, and we're all our own true selves, so just go for it.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I think that's probably where we're going to end it. So thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you. I was so delighted to be asked, and also just the fact that it's all, as far as I can tell, it's all young people. It's a festival run by young people, right?
Yeah, mostly, yeah. So we have a couple of adults helping us, but it's mainly young people.
Oh, I'd say the young people are doing all the work, do you know? But it's so nice to be asked, and it's so nice to have young people interested in books. And you know, you guys are the people that, if we're writing for children or for young people, you know, you guys are the future, and you're the ones paving the way, do you know. We've messed the world up a little bit, and I'm afraid we've landed it on your shoulders, but you know, you give us hope. You're doing amazing things, and thank you so much. That was such a good interview. I really enjoyed the questions.